UFO report is out. The reviews, mixed. The preliminary assessment delivered to Congress from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence landed like a Rorschach test. On one hand, skeptics felt it confirmed there was nothing to the UAP phenomena, just a bunch of fuzzy blurs. On the other, believers heralded the report as the leading edge of an official change in UFO policy. 70 years in the making. One thing's for certain, questions remain, as the report essentially states the same thing as declassified military memos from 1947. UFOs are real, frequent, but we do not know what they are. Might there be something more elusive, more distant about the UFO phenomenon? Perhaps something less material and more psychological, even spiritual? On this 11th episode of Intention, we explore these more ephemeral aspects of the UFO subject. Helping us on this journey is Reverend Dr. John Denker, author of The Quantum God. John has a PhD in range ecology and a master's degree from the Iliff School of Theology at Denver University. He has been a minister with specialty in theology and philosophy in the United Methodist tradition, and now is an observant Jew in the Reformed tradition. Undoubtedly, following any revelation concerning the presence of non-human intelligences, many human systems would be thrown into upheaval. What religious traditions would survive this Copernican shift? And will our understanding of reality itself change if we find we're not alone? Welcome to the show, John. We've had several conversations over the years on the nature of reality, and it appears that the UFO UAP topic has run headlong into this question. Now, this isn't something that has happened all of a sudden. The UFO UAP phenomenon, for as long as it's been around, decades, even longer, has always included a psychological component. And this component affects the perception and understanding of reality itself by those who have experienced sightings or other interaction. And this has always been an accompaniment to this phenomenon, and oftentimes for adherents of ufology, people that are following this topic closely, they call this high strangeness.
Yeah.
What is your understanding of the UFO phenomena? And, does it inform more about us or them?
That's really difficult to say. There's something going on out there that we don't understand. I always like to go back to Drake's equation and the Drake's paradox, where it shows that according to his equation, there should be quite a few intelligent species out there in the universe, some of which could be a billion years ahead of us, so we don't know. And as a result, let me go back a little second, but the problem, of course, is where are they? If there's all these intelligences out there, why don't we see them? And it's always kind of funny because in science, most scientists do accept the Drake equation as probably being fairly truthful, because there should be conditions for life out there in the universe. I mean, we've got billions of galaxies out there and billions of planets and billions of galaxies, that there should be life out there. There should be in a universe teeming with life, and yet we haven't been able to find any. Or at least officially we haven't found any. None that at least the Academy is going to recognize. But like I said, on one hand we say, well, there's all this life out there. On the other hand, we say, well, no, Nothing's come here yet. We haven't seen anything. And so on one hand, you have this high degree of probability. On the other hand, you have a bunch of skepticism at the same time. And so it's almost like a cognitive dissonance when it comes to the whole subject of UFOs. But one of the problems we have with it, obviously, is because we don't have the technology to do what these aircraft are doing, or these spacecraft, I should say. And I'm not just talking about in terms of speed and that kind of thing. I'm talking about in terms of they've got to have at least field propulsion, because there's no way you're going to get halfway across the universe to us unless you know something about field propulsion. And even then, it would probably take a long time. The universe is so big. And in fact, a lot of these craft are seen going in and out of existence at times. You know, they're there 1 minute, then they'll take a sharp left turn, and then they're just gone. Right. It's like they may have gone into a different dimension, or they may have gone into, in Star Trek, you call warp speed.
Right.
They are able to warp time and space, which makes it hard for us to look at them. And it could also be that because they are so advanced from us, that maybe it's kind of like us looking at ants.
Right.
And why would we want to communicate with ants? I noticed people, because I've watched a lot of Ancient Aliens and other UFO hunting shows, and all these people seem to have their own ideas as to why they're here, you know. Well, they're here to keep us from blowing ourselves up. They're here to keep us in line with the ecology. I don't think we have any idea why. But
Right.
we do want to take our values and place them on the UFO phenomenon.
Well, let me posit something for you. I recently had the chance to participate in this marathon room on that app called Clubhouse, which I'd never joined before, which is basically an audio only conversation, and you have a stage of maybe 15 or 20 people, and then there's an audience. And in the case of this room that was started by Eric Weinstein, the room lasted for 4 days straight, and there were 1,000 people in it. And I was invited to speak on the topic because I've been, doing some research on this topic with a research team on Facebook called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program Discussion Cell, which that's the formal name of the program that was revealed in the New York Times in the December 2017 article.
Luis Elizondo's.
Yeah, exactly. Luis Elizondo's program that he was eventually became the lead of. So you mentioned this sort of binary where you have skeptics and then you have believers. And definitely ufology for the last 70 years, I think the two-dimensional or sort of binary outlook is accurate, or that binary perspective of the movement. But I believe that since 2017, we've seen this kind of third faction, if you'll indulge the term, of ufology form that's more empirically based, data-driven, if only because we've got some evidence of gun camera footage and testimony from naval aviators, and we have testimony concerning the presence of radar data, not just from one particular craft, but radar data from multiple surface vessels. And even John Ratcliffe, the former director of national intelligence, mentioned that satellite radar data is also a part of this body of evidence that perhaps materializes this kind of third frame for ufology, where, if we base our perception or our opinion about this phenomenon supported by the kind of information that it would be worthy of archiving in a history book, for example. That really starts to materialize this third faction of ufology. And, I wanted to know if you felt like you see that happening. I mean, clearly with the number of folks that, occupy the corridors of power coming out and talking about the possibility of non-human intelligence. You've got President Obama, you've got President Clinton, you've got former CIA chiefs, John Brennan, James Woolsey, James Clapper, DNI chief, John Ratcliffe, Newt Gingrich came out and was talking about it. So do you think that there's this kind of sea change going on right now? I mean, most of the people that are observing the topic believe that there's this incredible swell and momentum going on right now towards disclosure.
Yeah, I think there basically has been a big sea change in it. You can watch TV and your news anchors don't have the giggle factor that much anymore, where they used to talk about UFOs and then kind of giggle about it. But it's not so much the evidence, I think, as much as it's the Navy, it's the Defense Department coming out and saying, we don't know what this is. And it's obviously there, and they've got the videos of it doing things that we don't know that any of our aircraft can do. It doesn't seem to have any means of propulsion. It doesn't have any means of guidance, and yet it's flying around. But the important thing, it was the Navy, and it came out from what we consider to be authoritative source. Mm-hmm. And I think we've had evidence for probably 50 years, but the government has never come out and said that there was anything there. Project Blue Book was pretty much a cover-up of the whole subject matter. And now, for some reason, they have decided to come out with it. Because basically, they came pretty close to disclosure with this Tic Tac video out of 2017. And so, yeah, it's changed people's minds. You had 60 Minutes do an hour on it, which they never would have done before on this. You had Tucker Carlson on Fox News has actually been discussing this for some time.
Right.
For a long time, he was the only major commentator that would even broach the subject. But because before, if you ever mentioned seeing a flying saucer, you were considered to be kind of nuts. Even though, as Mitch Yukaku said, there's no law in physics against there being people from another planet coming here. It's not really paranormal because we're not violating any known laws of physics by having aliens come here. By all reasoning, there should be aliens out there. And so it's really not, but it was always treated as paranormal, and it was always put into the paranormal category when it came to discussion. It was put in with ghosts and with all kinds of other things that basically have a high degree of skepticism and belief factor involved in, but not a whole lot of facts. And so, yeah, it's changed because the Navy's come out now and said there's stuff up there.
And, how does your background in your religious work, you've been a student of theology, you've been a Methodist minister, you're now a practicing observant Jew in the Reform movement. And, as we discussed earlier, John, you mentioned that you were born Jewish, so it wasn't like some big conversion thing that you went through to go back to the Torah. But how does your theological background inform you as to the potential of non-human intelligences?
Well, religion has a major problem. And it's a little bigger than just UFOs. But let me go back. Ken Wilber is a Taoist. He wrote a book called Spectrum of Consciousness. And it basically takes us through several stages of becoming more and more enlightened as a civilization. Okay. And we're supposedly going into a green stage now, where basically we look at ourselves as citizens of the earth. We're being less tribalistic, less nationalistic. We're recognizing that there are other religious viewpoints out there. And so we're kind of becoming much more tolerant in that way. However, religion has a problem. religion, the way it's practiced, even in your mainline Protestant churches, is still what they call red. It's still in the red, which is medieval. It's the medieval times were times of the kings and the feudal states and everything of that nature, and people looked at God as being a king. And we used to call it the Santa Claus God, sitting up in the sky, looking a lot like Michelangelo's mural at the Sistine Chapel.
Mm-hmm.
And religion has never gotten off that. We're still there. Even in your more liberal churches, such as the Methodist Church or the Episcopal Church, or those churches, they're still, you go to church and the church you find is the Santa Claus God. Now, I don't think Episcopalians or Catholics or Methodists or that sort, even Christian Scientists would have that much trouble with there being aliens out there. Catholic Church has already said it, that they consider them children of God, and they would try to preach the gospel of Christ to them, okay, if they're out there. And so I don't think they would. I think you are going to have trouble with a lot of your more fundamentalist churches. You still are stuck in the idea that if there are extraterrestrials out there, these extraterrestrials are angels and demons and that sort of thing.
And we've heard some of those opinions, powers and principalities, that these are battles going on in the skies to take down strongholds. And
that Battle of Armageddon's going to take place in the sky when all these aliens get together and stuff. Some of your indigenous religions might handle it quite well, because they're of course for a long time into the idea of the star people.
Mm-hmm.
The Hopis and all that have traditions of the star people. So then it may be just a coming back of the people that settled them in the first place.
So I almost feel like within every faith tradition, or within many of them, there's this kind of mystery school faction. Like in Islam, you've got the Sufis, you've got the Baha'i, maybe is an outspringing of Zoroastrianism or some of the pre-Abrahamic faith traditions, the Baha'i sort of the movement. You got the Kabbalah in Judaism. And then you have the more new thought religions, which you mentioned Christian Science. I believe, although Christian Science doesn't call itself a new thought religion, it's probably in that zone. So, and what would be the mystery school of the evangelical or Pentecostal movement, if there is one?
Evangelicals really are very dualistic. They're not into the idea of a mystical tradition at all. I just don't see that. In Judaism, in fact, you've had to go the other way. A lot of your Hasids, which were found as a very kind of a mystical organization or mystical thought, has actually gone back more towards the Orthodox than what they were. But they've got still have the Chabad school, but again, that's gone more back to actually the older ways. What's really catching on in Judaism is the Spanish Kabbalah, which is what I study and practice. And we wouldn't really have a problem, to be honest. One of the reasons I became a Kabbalist was the fact that I studied modern physical theory. I got obsessed with it after a while, studying various books and reading Einstein and Ian Barber and Paul Davies and just a myriad of other theoretical physicists. And I was sitting at night class at Denver University, and Seth Ward was my professor, and he got through outlining the tree of life. And I looked at that and I said, you know what that is, don't you? That's modern physical theory. It just, bam, that's it. He's got it down. Those may be ancient Hebrew words that he's using, but I can tell you where they fall in line with the model of quantum physics and your models of field theory, And a lot of other people have recognized that too, not just me. There's a myriad of books out there now on science and religion because it was Anthony Flew, I think, who used to be an atheist, is now believes in God. He said that science has climbed a mountain only to find mystics were there thousands of years ahead of them. And so, and what it is that there's a change in our outlook. We're right in the middle of it right now. So it's hard to say how it's eventually going to end, but we're kind of in the middle of it, of a new enlightenment. Diana Butler Bass from the Episcopal Church, she's a historian and a priest in the Episcopal tradition, does a good presentation on this, how we're going through a new enlightenment right now based on modern physical theory. We went through the Enlightenment, 1500s with Copernicus and Galileo and Kepler and that group, Newton. And we found out that it wasn't the sun that went around the earth. We had it backwards. It was the earth that went around the sun. Well, now what we're finding and where we're headed is that it isn't matter that of the brain that makes up consciousness. It's consciousness that's made up the matter in the brain. We've had it backwards.
So yeah, let me just interject because I wanted to read for you a statement from 1894, which you may recognize. Question: what is the scientific statement of being? Answer: there is no life, truth, substance, or intelligence in matter. All is infinite mind and its manifestation. Spirit is immortal truth. Matter is mortal error. Spirit is real and eternal. Matter is unreal and temporal. Spirit is God, and man is his image and likeness. Hence, man is spiritual and not material. And then recently in 2008, Donald Hoffman, who's a mathematician that's been doing a number of presentations, including a pretty famous TED Talk that he had done, he says, what exists in the objective world, independent of my perceptions, is a world of conscious agents, not a world of unconscious particles and fields. Those particles and fields are icons of conscious agents, but are not themselves fundamental denizens of the objective world. Consciousness is fundamental. Now, I've enjoyed reading your book, The Quantum God. And, I'm wondering, is consciousness fundamental? And is this really just the scientific community glomming onto revelations that had taken place in a more spiritual context in many years past? And this is almost like a renaissance, a rediscovery of some of these more spiritual principles, albeit backed by some data?
I think we finally got into reductionist philosophy so far that we found out that in every particle we found the whole, and that was a big revelation. We found out things like quantum non-locality, where the mind affects whether or not particles show up as a wave or as a particle. CU up here has been working about the last 15 years on quantum computers. Quantum computers, basically the nanochips, which are the microchips, exist in hyperspace. And through quantum entanglement, they're basically, these chips are located in two places at the same time. And basically what hyperspace is, it's when you take time and you turn it into another spatial dimension. So you've got 4 spatial dimensions rather than 3 spatial and 1 of time. And so they're building these, and the advantage of them is they can do multiple calculations at the same time, whereas computers now, even our AIs, can only do one at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And
very, very short time. They
yeah.
can do one at a very, very short time in a lot
very,
of
very short time. PC will even be shorter, and they can do it multiple calculations. In fact, if we ever truly get AI that's self-aware, which I don't know that we'll ever do that, but if we do, it's probably going to come out of these quantum computers that do that. But the one thing is that they have a hard time telling you how many atomic units they actually have in the computer. I guess it's the motherboard or whatever they call it. But anyway, because if they go to observe it, to measure it, they will then turn to two particles. The one particle that was in two places at the same time will then turn into two particles. So the mind has a very big effect on that. It's like I said, it comes from the idea of quantum entanglement, where if you split a photon in half, it doesn't actually become two photons until it's observed to be two photons. And you can tell because you can change the spin on the one half, and it will change the spin on the other half. And they don't actually become separate until they're actually measured. And then they're separate. So it's like you can have one particle on this part of the universe and one on the other side of the universe. They've also found, interestingly enough, that that's how the human brain works too, is that when we get some kind of stimulus, outside stimulus, several parts of the brain light up at the same time. And it's because of this quantum entanglement, getting into what they call the microtubules, but it's this quantum effect in the microtubules. It all happens at once. It's like one particle affecting several areas of microtubules. Roger Penrose writes a lot about that. Roger Penrose, and also he works with the guy from the University of Arizona on that as well. But there's a lot of advancement in that. There's a lot of advancement in consciousness now because the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Berkeley, California, founded by the astronaut Edgar Mitchell. Arizona University has done a lot. Some of the more fascinating stuff has come out of Princeton University and with their consciousness project. And so a lot of, we're finding out just how big a role the mind actually plays in creating our reality. And we're finding out more and more all the time. You mentioned Copenhagen interpretation a little bit ago when we were on the phone.
Sure.
I've never been a strict adherent to Copenhagen interpretation because it seemed to me if you're a strict adherent to it, then that means I'm God and everything else is just an illusion. I don't believe that. But I do believe that
wouldn't the just for the audience's sake, wouldn't the Copenhagen interpretation, it supports the notion that it's an observed universe?
Basically,
and that the collapse of the wave function is really the product of observation from a conscious agent, and you can extrapolate that into sort of thinking about our ecosystem as being a living organism, our solar system being a living organism, our galaxy being a living organism. In fact, the universe being the mind of God. I mean, if you want to throw in some woo in there.
Yeah, basically what it came down to is that we found out with this quantum non-locality. John Wheeler at Princeton was the one that found it through what is known as the slit experiments. And that whether or not the wavelengths collapse to form a particle or not depended upon observation, how he decided to observe it. Well, there's a problem when it comes to the universe, and that is human beings haven't been around since the beginning of the universe. The universe has a long history. In fact, there are different numbers for the age of the universe. I use 14.3 billion years, but if that, then humans have probably been around only the last 300,000 years of that. And so
right.
What created what caused those wavelengths to collapse before there were human beings? Well, the logical answer is there had to be an outside observer in order to make those wavelengths collapse. I'm a little bit different in that, because I think, to me, that it may just be a technical difference, is that I'm a non-dualist, what they call. I'm a mystic and a non-dualist. I don't believe I believe that everything is one and everything is God, and God literally created the universe from his or herself. And
that it would pantheism.
But that the Copenhagen interpretation kind of implies that God is separate from the physical universe. So I don't like that implication. I do think God transcends the physical universe. In fact, one of the things that really matches our view of the universe right now really matches the tree of life in Kabbalah. Because the tree of life in Kabbalah, you've got the tree of life, which is creation, okay? But you've got the lower part of creation, which is basically be the electromagnetic field. You've got the upper part of creation, which is basically the metric gravitational field. And then all that outside, that infinite nothing, it's called Ein Sof, or infinite nothing, is the zero-point field. And so there's three fields in quantum physics, and it matches pretty closely to the Kabbalistic tree of life. And but God transcends all that. So it's all God. And so that's one of the reasons when I saw that, I knew that to a large degree was what my dad was talking about when I was too young to care. So, but anyway.
One of the subtitles of your book, The Quantum God, is why atheists, why our grandchildren won't know atheism.
Yeah, it may take longer than that.
And just to unpack that a little bit, do you believe that perhaps the more dogmatic religions' conception of deity, like Orthodox religions, or some Orthodox religions, where the Santa Claus God that you mentioned earlier, this sort of anthropomorphized personality type of a God, do you believe that the atheists today would rather think about deity in those cartoonish terms to support their atheism, and they're maybe not grappling with this more profound, sublime nature of reality and consciousness discussion? And would that also, John, sort of be a descriptor for your sense of deity? It's not necessarily like a personality that has peccadillos or interested in the microcosm of affairs happening between the Republican and Democratic Party in Washington D.C., for example. Is your conception of deity more of a force?
Yeah, I'd be along with Moses Maimonides or Aristotle. I believe it's the prime force of the universe, and it is intelligent, but not a whole lot can be said about it because it is really beyond our conception. The zero-point field, for example, the universe, the best way to describe the universe, and it's not true because it's four-dimensional, but I can only describe it in three dimensions because that's all a human brain can conceptualize of. The universe is like a balloon that's blown up from the middle. And it's blown up like that. Okay, it's round. Time and space only exists on the skin of that universe. Okay, it doesn't exist in the middle. It doesn't exist outside. But we know there is an outside because particles go in and out. In fact, the first law of thermodynamics says that we conserve energy. Well, not necessarily. At any one point in time, we can be in energy debt or an energy credit, depending on what particles have gone in and out of the zero-point field. And for us, it's like they're going in and out of existence altogether. Because you see, the way we view reality time and space is a canvas on which we paint our reality. And when you take away time and space, what are we expanding into? It's nothing that we can even conceptualize of. And of course, in many religious traditions, you can't conceptualize of God, and that basically probably is the realm of intelligence, consciousness, whatever, out there.
It's like why in Judaism you don't even think you can name his name, and he's referred to as Hashem.
Yeah,
it's sort of
Hashem just means a name.
It's a variable.
Yeah. So so we can't imagine it, and even strictly in the Christian tradition, we can't. At least you can't describe the Father, Jesus, as God. You can as a human being, but the Father's nondescript, and you have this in some other religions too. And Buddhism they've got more of a state of godliness more than a God. But still, that can't really be described. Hinduism's the same way with the Brahmin and stuff. And so so we can't really know. We cannot imagine certain things because we're stuck with the brain that sees the world in 3 dimensions in 1 dimension of time. And that's why we can't even see inside these hyperspace computers that they're building, is because we've got a certain way that we view reality that has to be that way. And but some people, let's go back to say if you're a very fundamentalist Christian and stuff who believes in the Santa Claus God. Yeah, I think a lot of atheists, because atheists are Judeo-Christian atheists. In other words, the God they don't believe in is the Judeo-Christian God.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they do use that to say, boy, you got to be stupid to believe in Santa Claus up there in the sky someplace.
Right.
And that's where religion, I think, the major religions have failed, because they have failed to keep up with modern knowledge. Stephen Hawking, in his book, A Brief History of Time, at the very last part of it says, where are the philosophers today? Modern physical theory has changed everything. And yet they're not changing. They're still back preaching the same old dogma they've always been preaching.
Do you believe, John, that, getting back to the topic of UAP and ufology, do you believe that, or, just speculate for a moment with me, what is the likelihood of non-human intelligences, their capacity to reveal new attributes of deity or new understanding of consciousness and spirituality?
I think it'd be fantastic. You're talking about people, like I said, conceivably could be 1 billion years ahead of us. They may not even use. They may not even have physical bodies.
Right.
They may exist in some ether someplace, and maybe the UFOs we see or UAPs we see are just kind of robots or some kind of an instrument. The one thing that I always did like with down at Roswell, for example, it was always kind of hard for me to believe that they're running around in little spaceships as circles. And to me, they'd be far more advanced than that. But I don't know. Maybe there's different classes of them. But and it may be that they were robots. They were just something that if they did crash, we could understand a little more.
Yeah, one of my colleagues on my research group, my ad hoc research group, Rocky Swanson, he talks about the classic gray aliens' eyes being so big, and the theory is that perhaps that's just goggles and it's just a spacesuit, because if the eyes were that big, the skull wouldn't even be big enough to hold the eye, I mean, if it was a round object. So I mean, that kind of falls in line with also the potential that these are worker bees or robots, that may be the product of an advanced civilization, biological machines. So I've encountered several.
I think we have a lot to learn from them, because they have to be quite a bit advanced over us.
And one of the things that we were discussing in another conversation was the idea that if you have this technology that's potentially 1 billion years more advanced than our current state of understanding in our technology, if ever that species or those non-human intelligences started to put their thumbs on the scale on world affairs, the entire hierarchical power structures of the planet would be upturned. Yeah. Because at that point, if there was ever just even an infinitesimal placing their thumb on the scale in any particular geopolitical issue, every group in humanity would be positioning itself to have access to that power structure, which is now the top dog.
Right.
So, I mean, do you have any thoughts on the Prime Directive, if you will?
Well, you may be watching the Prime Directive. That's why, we've got sightings of them, but they've never seemed to try anything. They haven't, blown up any cities yet, or parked their spacecraft on the White House lawn or done anything. It seems like it is a way of observing us and seeing what we're doing and how we're evolving, and so it does seem kind of like that to me. And maybe at some point, if we evolve, then maybe they'll feel that we're capable of communicating with. There'd be a lot of problems with them communicating with us right now, because if we ever had access to their technology, we'd be blowing each other up tomorrow. I mean, that's,
right.
We not only have to advance in terms of our intelligence or cumulative knowledge, we'd also have to advance in terms of our morality. So
yeah,
we're still not there either morally or intellectually. We're still just little children.
And the thought experiment that proves that out unequivocally is you consider the level of inequality or inequality that we treat each other as humans.
Yeah.
Imagine what humankind, or at least some factions within humankind, would treat non-humans.
Yeah.
That's
we're still in a day and age where our group is still the only group that's really human. And our religion is the only true religion. And so still very much there.
Right.
And even at the green spot, I said we've gone up to where like 12% of the population is now green, which is more tolerant. But there are levels above that, above the green, and they're called the teal and stuff like that. And what the teal can do is they can accept political differences. They don't care. The one big bugaboo in our society today, even with the Greens, is that the Greens still believe very dogmatically in their political beliefs, and so both sides are still trying to impose their political beliefs on the other side. It's
with the dominance over sort of methodology. That's one of the things that Marshall Rosenberg emphasized in the nonviolent communication courses that he took, is that woven through the entire fabric of our communication methods is this dominance over kind of stereotyping and presumptions and prejudices, and very interesting. I don't know if you had exposure to nonviolent communication, those courses.
Well, I took a class at Iliff by Bossert. Dr. Bossert was that. And I remember Bossert talking about, because it was a course on peace negotiations and developing peace. And Bossert was talking about his time during the Vietnam War, when he was leading protest demonstrations against the war. And the one thing he always preached before they went out and did anything was peace. This is going to be a peaceful exercise. It's going to be a peaceful demonstration. But then he turned to us and he says, but I know there's a bunch of those people. If that peace doesn't work, they're turning to violence. And that was always one of the problems he had to deal with, is a certain segment of that group was only going to be peaceful as long as they thought it would work for them. And then they would turn to violence. And of course, I was in college during the Vietnam War. And yeah, they did. They burned down a couple of buildings,
Yeah.
spray painted some of the.
I remember taking some classes with regular teach-ins by Reverend James Lawson, who they were nonviolence classes, and he happened to be teaching. He was the teacher for Martin Luther King Jr., teaching him the way of the Ahimsa Soul Force, and in fact invited Martin Luther King Jr. to Nashville. When Martin Luther King was assassinated. And he talks about how the means and the ends must be consonant, that you can never, for example, wage violence to achieve peace, that you have to be consonant in the way that you're proceeding with your movement. And that's something I think that we'll be grappling with for many, many years as a species to finally absorb that kind of transcendent long-term reality.
Because as long as we have a vision and we feel our vision's absolutely right, then we will always feel the need to try to impose by force our vision of the way things should be. And we've got to be able to grow out of that at some point.
So John, you've had a lot of experience working within the academy, so to speak. And I have noticed how there are leaders in astrophysics and leaders in the physics departments of universities that are really poo-pooing and pushing back on this new era of ufology, if you will indulge the expression, calling it an era, meaning, since 2017, you have this data that's been released that's actually concrete data, this information, and the government now is saying that there's 120 incidents since 2004 that have occurred. The government's also saying that it's not American technology. I mean, these are data points. These are actual milestones in this narrative. Oftentimes, it's been dismissed out of hand as being, well, this is some top secret United States government program, the technology that we're seeing. And that question has been answered. That option is now off the table, as Luis Elizondo talks about. But I've noticed a lot of pushback from the real leadership in the scientific community on this topic. And I recognize their need for real hard, concrete data before they shake their paradigm. But I feel like it's a little disappointing to see these really brilliant individuals resorting to almost kooky conspiracy theories, like the New York Times is engaging in these articles because they want to undermine science, or the CIA was conducting a secret test on the USS Nimitz battle group, and the admiral didn't even know it. And I mean, these are the kind of first blush reactions. And the way that I understand that is, as animals, we want to get to a place of rest when we're in a place of dissonance. And so they're going to gravitate towards these excuses to dismiss this thing out of hand, but they really are sounding somewhat silly. I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on how the scientific community is metabolizing this topic, and what it would take for them to come online.
Even when it comes to the new, quote unquote, new physics, I mean, they're a little slow. The problem with academia is, well, for one thing, money. Money gets involved with everything. And where does academia and science get their money? Well, they actually get it from Defense Department contracts, or they get it from private industry to develop products. And so they're really not interested in knowledge for knowledge's sake. Einstein wrote about this a lot, that the Science Academy was never really that interested in knowledge for the sake of knowledge. They always, it had to be about money, especially warfare. They would always make a lot of money on. And so and they would love to, I know, come up with a final theory of everything, which is, I think, is a total pipe dream at this point. But they would love to, because that would essentially, in their minds, make them God and make them a whole lot of money. And so they're slow to come along because they've got vested interest in their theories. There's also an emotional aspect to it too. Was it Max Planck, Einstein's mentor, said that new ideas are not accepted on the strength of their argument. They're accepted because the people with the old ideas die. And that's basically because they get invested in their theories just as much as a fundamentalist Christian gets invested in his theological view. And so they're hard to change. But also, when it comes to UFOs and stuff, I think there's a particular challenge there. And that right now is that they're looked at really, I'm not saying they're God, but kind of just below God. They're supposed to be the smartest people in the world. What happens if there's UFOs out there that really do exist, or UAPs, and they talk to us? They're no longer the smartest people in the universe. They're going to have to take a back seat.
Mm.
They're no longer at the top. And I think there's part of that too. I think that they would love to get that. What was it, Steven Weinberg wrote a book, Dreams of the Final Theory? I think they'd love to get that final theory and basically get to a point where they could manipulate practically everything.
Now there is a group, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. I think they have about 50 PhDs in there. One of their leading scientists is Kevin Knuth, I believe is the pronunciation of his name. And when he was asked this question about the scientific community, how they're pushing back, he said, he doesn't understand it, because faced with the problem of understanding what these craft are and what these objects are, what this testimony has been for the last 70 years, this is the most fascinating problem for a scientist to wrap his head around, to throw himself into, to try to solve the idea of what would it take to be able to accelerate a craft at 9,000 miles an hour and do a 90-degree turn, and all these kind of things, these extraordinary feats of maneuverability that, by our understanding, defy the laws of physics. I think he takes sort of a childlike approach to this, which is beautiful. In contrast, I think that some of the folks that are very adult, very serious about this, they have lost their sense of imagination, to their own individual subjective needs, perhaps.
Yeah, I think they see that their way of thinking, not so much their science as much as even their ideology, is a threat with something like this coming on board. And also one other thing is it's awfully hard for an individual scientist to step out, because then you're shunned by the rest of the academic community, and that means your papers don't get published and this kind of thing. And there is a certain group of people that very much does control who gets published. So you never want to get too far out on a limb, because they'll saw it off. And so it keeps, everything is right now, the money, the power, and everything really is on the side of those who want to play it fairly conservatively.
So Bryce Zabel, who's the author of After Disclosure, along with Richard Dolan, he recently described the disclosure process as Disclosure requires global confirmation of unconventional UFO UAP reality made public by multiple official sources, both governmental and private, in a way that allows citizens to investigate and engage the phenomenon openly and without ridicule. Eventually, it must include significant and transparent release of documents and evidence, plus independent investigations with the power to subpoena witnesses and grant immunity. And the government, if we're to believe the leaks to the New York Times concerning this upcoming UAP report that's due at the end of the month, has stated that it is not U.S. technology. I'll make the considered conclusion that that perhaps the government's unwilling to make, but there's a low likelihood that this is Russia or Chinese technology, if only because I believe that even if there was even a 1% chance that these objects were demonstrating technology from a foreign peer adversary, there is no way the intelligence services or government would be participating in any level of disclosure. Just in the context of counterintelligence.
Right.
With the announcement that it's not our tech and that there have been 120 incidents since 2004, is disclosure happening right now?
I think we're in the process of it.
Yeah.
I think we're in the process of it. I think it's been coming. Well, for one thing, Ancient Aliens has been on for how many years now? 20 years, something like that. It's been on for a long time. And the American public, and of course other shows like that, there was a show called Blue Book too, on the cover up the Blue Book was doing it. We have kind of been softened up, really, to the idea that there probably are aircraft out there. I mean, there were people when they discovered when the 2017 release of the Tic Tac video didn't cause anybody to go out in the street and try to burn things or anything.
Right.
I mean, the public was pretty much kind of a so what, because they've been watching this other stuff in the popular media for quite a while. So I think that this is one case where I think probably the public is probably far advanced than the people in government and the people in the academy are. I think it's not going to be too big of a surprise for people that, there are aliens out there. I think for the public to really get up in arms is if the aliens would actually land or actually do something and really make contact, then I think you'd see a much more excited response out of the public. But just to the idea that there are aliens out there, I think a lot of the public thinks they're out there right now.
That's not